Hi again, everyone. This is Mark from LucidLift, and this is just a quick summary of our recent webinar, Scaling Agile Without Killing It. In this video, we're going to talk about the 3 reasons that organizations typically scale their Agile practice, the 4 most popular frameworks for scaling Agile, which framework might work best in your particular situation, and then finally guiding principles for scaling your own Agile practice. As always, if you do need help with Agile training, coaching, or scaling, please do let me know at mark@lucidlift.com, or you can scan this QR code or follow the link and book a quick 15-minute meeting on my calendar. I'd love to talk to you. The Agile movement began in the mid-90s, and it was actually a reaction to the way that most software was developed at the time. Most people call that waterfall because of the linear approach to defining requirements first, and then designing the whole system, coding the whole system, testing the whole system, deploying the whole system, and then going back afterward and fixing bugs. The early Agile pioneers experimented with ways of eliminating unnecessary meetings and process steps and documents and getting back to the essence of software development. Agile works by connecting small cross-functional teams of developers directly with customers and getting constant feedback as to what they want and need. As more and more Agile teams started having success, companies naturally wanted to roll it out on a more broad scale. So they started adding Agile teams, and it didn't take long for a few problems to start surfacing. Problems like different Agile teams serving the same set of customers, or people with a certain skill set maybe stuck in a functional silo. So people started experimenting with different ways to scale Agile, and over time, a few frameworks emerged. The 4 frameworks that we're going to talk about today, and the most popular frameworks, are Scaled Agile Framework, or SAFe, Scrum at Scale, Nexus, and Large Scale Scrum, or LESS. The first framework on our list, and also the most popular by far, and also the most complex, is called the Scaled Agile Framework, or SAFe. You can see on the bottom of the diagram here that SAFe is usually built on an iterative framework like Scrum. One concept that it does add is called program increment planning, or PI planning. A program increment is usually a quarter, and all of the teams will get together and talk about any dependencies between teams and anything that needs to be thought of at a program level. SAFe introduces a concept called the Agile release train, which is essentially a list of features and non-functional requirements that the teams work in order. They'll pull as many in as they can handle at any one time, Kanban style, and then as soon as one's done, they will release it into production and pull the next one in. To handle the Agile release train, SAFe introduces a new role called the release train engineer, and the release train engineer acts kind of like a Scrum Master would for a single team, but oversees the entire program. For larger enterprises, SAFe adds another layer on top of the Agile release train, either the portfolio or the large solution. You can learn more about SAFe at scaledagileFramework.com. There are a lot of really good ideas here, a lot of things that you can use, even if you decide not to implement SAFe in its entirety. The next framework on our list is Scrum at Scale, and this was developed by Jeff Sutherland. Jeff Sutherland and Ken Schwaber were the original creators of Scrum. Scrum at Scale uses Scrum to scale Scrum. So basically it adds another Scrum layer on top of all of the Scrum teams. So you have a group of Scrum teams and they will comprise a Scrum of Scrums, and the Scrum of Scrums will have its own ceremonies, its own sprint planning, its own daily stand-up, its own retro, its own backlog refining. And if you are going to scale further, there's a Scrum of Scrums. Both SAFe and Scrum at Scale introduce an executive team that oversees the Agile ecosystem. In Scrum at Scale, it's called the Executive Action Team, and in SAFe, it's called the Lean Agile Center of Excellence, or the Lean Agile COE. They're both the same concept. So you can see at the heart of it, Scrum at Scale and SAFe are somewhat similar. Next framework on our list is called Nexus, and Nexus was created by Ken Schwaber, the other co-creator of Scrum. Nexus differs from SAFe and Scrum at Scale in that it only has a single product backlog and a single product owner. Nexus introduces one new team. The team is called the Nexus Integration Team. And the Nexus Integration Team is responsible for taking the outputs of the individual Scrum teams and producing a potentially releasable integrated increment at the end of each sprint. The final framework on our list is called Large Scale Scrum, or LESS, and it was developed by a guy named Craig Larman. And Craig's idea was to develop a framework that gave the minimal amount of structure for people to get started, but left things as flexible as possible. This framework is conceptually similar to Nexus. You'll see that it has two different sprint plannings and it has two different retrospectives. It does have a common sprint review, but the idea again is that the teams are working off a single product backlog with a single product owner and deciding which teams will work on which features. LESS recommends a single product owner for up to 8 teams, and after that it introduces something called LESS Huge, which organizes groups of product owners for larger numbers of teams across the enterprise. So let's talk about the reasons why an organization might scale Agile, and then we can talk about which framework would make sense in each situation. There are 3 basic reasons to scale. The first reason is if you have a system or function-based organization and you can't easily reorganize towards customer. The second reason is if you have a complex system, so you've got multiple feature teams, but you want to hold everything together because there's a common user interface or maybe a common code base, so all the teams have to cooperate. And the third reason is that you have a single list of features, but you just need to go faster. So you need to add more teams so that you can get more done more quickly. So the first reason is that you have a system or function-based organization and you can't easily unwind this. So let's just say that you had a UX team and a core processing team and an API team and a data systems team. And in order to get anything done for end customers, you were cutting across all these teams. So let's just say that you wanted to set up Agile teams in these different areas, and now you want to manage the dependencies across each of these organizations. This is a situation where you might use something like SAFe, Scaled Agile Framework. It's a complicated situation. It's got silos, technical silos, and you need to very carefully manage the dependencies across each of these teams with an Agile release train. You need to be careful though here, and we'll talk about this in a little bit, that you don't just take your waterfall process and use different words. The second scenario is you have a complex system with multiple feature teams, but you have a single user interface. So let's imagine you have a bank and you've got different teams that do different things. So you've got a team working on manage user profile software, you've got a team working on manage all accounts, a team working on open new accounts, and a team working on transfer funds. But all of these different systems need to have a common look and feel for your end users who are all just customers of the bank. This might be a good application for something like Scrum at Scale. You've got different backlogs. You could just add a lightweight Scrum of Scrums on top of this in order to manage the dependencies. If in the same scenario, on the other hand, you were able to take all 4 product backlogs and create a single backlog, you might want to move to something like Nexus, where you can have a single product owner, all the feature teams talk together about which teams are doing what at the beginning of the sprint, and then they execute on that sprint, and then you would add a Nexus integration team to bring it all together at the end into a single release. The third scenario is that you've got a single backlog and you have a feature team that's producing value for a small set of customers, and as your customer base grows, you just want to add more small teams to work from the same backlog just to produce value for a growing customer base faster. This is actually a great situation for something like LESS, where you just need a lightweight way to keep everything organized. Let's add one more scenario where you've got a bunch of different feature teams and they're all working independently for a different set of customers on a separate backlog. That is actually not a great reason to add any sort of scaled agile framework. If at all possible, you want to try to keep teams autonomous. So don't add overhead and complexity where you don't have to. So as a quick review from left to right, SAFe, again, is the most popular framework. It adds several new roles, and it's best for legacy enterprises with large-scale dependencies. But be careful here because it can easily become waterfall with different words. Scrum at Scale is easily adoptable from Scrum, and it is similar to SAFe with its roles and meanings. So it adds a similar level of complexity. It works for scaling a handful of teams, but in my opinion, it gets pretty burdensome as you add more teams and more complexity. If you're going to do something like that, SAFe is probably a better framework. Nexus, again, has a single product backlog and a single product owner. It is very agile because of the single backlog. So both Nexus and Less, you can change directions business-wise more quickly because they do have that single backlog. Nexus adds an integration team to ensure that integrated release at the end of each sprint. A possible downside with both Nexus and Less, actually, is that they require a customer-centric organization. You have to be organized the right way or it's not going to work. And to finish up, Less, again, has a single product backlog and product owner. Again, very agile. It seeks to create minimal overhead but still adds some structure. So as far as adding the least amount of complexity but still having a framework to work with, Less is probably a great option. But again, it does require a customer-centric organization. So if you can't organize that way, Less won't work for you. So the obvious question is, can I create my own framework? In my opinion, the answer is absolutely yes. Based on your own situation, you can pick and choose the elements that work best for you. Here are a few guiding principles to remember when you're picking a scaling framework or if you're building your own. First one, and the most important one, is remember why you started using Agile in the first place. The worst possible thing you could do is implement a heavy framework that you don't need and end up in a place potentially worse than where you started. I have unwound a lot of SAFe implementations over the last several years that have kind of lost their way. Next, make sure that you push decision making down as close to the customers as you can so that you can move as quickly as possible. Next, make sure that you can follow a thread from your top level objectives to your team activities. One hallmark of Agile is that everybody on every team knows how their work is impacting the company at a high level. Next, keep your teams as autonomous as possible, so organize around features. In other words, don't scale if you don't need to. If you can keep a team working with a group of customers and you don't need to integrate them with other teams, that's obviously the most effective way to produce software. The next guiding principle is use barely enough process in meetings. So you want to make sure that you stay as light as you possibly can. So don't use a heavy framework when just one additional simple event would work. The next point is related, but I think it's worth mentioning separately, and that is stay away from status meetings, if at all possible. And that's especially important as you're scaling. Make sure that you use the results to communicate status. And the last point is when you're adding new processes and meetings, make sure that you do it slowly and with great caution. Again, don't scale anything that you don't need to. Just make sure that you add the things that are absolutely necessary. So here's the bottom line. The first point here, don't just implement a framework because you have lots of teams. Know what problems you're actually trying to solve and make sure that you choose or develop a framework around those problems. Next, learn about the frameworks online. There's tons and tons of information out there. Make sure that you go out and look at them all and find the best ideas and use the best of all of them. Next, decide what scaling elements would be helpful in your situation, and then just experiment and adapt until you find what works. And last, of course, keep your framework as simple as you possibly can. Thanks for watching this video. I hope it was useful to you. And again, if you need any assistance with training, coaching, or Agile scaling, I would love to hear from you. Contact me at mark@lucidlift.com, or you can scan the QR code and just schedule a quick 15-minute meeting. Hope to talk to you soon.